There's a great story. Fax Gilbert, in one of the newsletters, it's in the archive on the website, wrote about where are we now with mutuality. And I think he included this in that article. I've heard him tell the story a couple of times, but there were these two men who traveled around the country to college campuses to talk about gay marriage, one for and one against. And they were always invited, for the same programs, and they often shared the stage together and so forth. But they were diametrically opposed on the question of gay marriage. So then something happens. There's a snowstorm or something, and they're both trapped in the airport. They can't get out. And look, there they are at the same gate, right? These two people who are completely diametrically opposed to marriage. So they end up sitting down to have a cup of coffee or a meal, and they start talking about their beliefs. And through the conversation, what they came to was the place where they both agreed, which was that marriage is sacred. Marriage is sacred. And so the other stuff fell away because they found that common ground, right? And this is often what we find when we're ideologically opposed to another person. It's like the death penalty, is one of those things. I read some articles on this years ago that said that the reason that Americans can't get clear on the feeling about the death penalty is that both sides hold the same basic tenet, which is nobody has the right to play God. But if we could start from that, then we could find our way around, let's say, looking at why we disagree and how it feels to us and where the harm comes in and so forth. Christopher Wallace in the Recognition Sutras says, I'm paraphrasing him, but he says it much better in his direct quote. It's like, it's not so easy to see God in everybody. There are some people that it's easier to see God in than others, yeah? Or the divine. And so when we look at the other, if you look at the map right now, of the election stakes, of the blue frame and the red middle, what we see is what an incredibly divided culture we are right now. We are divided from ourselves. I'm going to quote Alan again, his ears are going to be ringing tonight. But, one of his analogies is you think about the population of the world, it's like 7 billion cells in one body, right? We're all the same. We're all human beings. And so when we look at the other and we feel that pushback, there's a way in which it is that fear of difference, or is this a part of myself? Is there a shadow part of myself that I'm not able to see? And when we look at the amount of shadow that seems to be present right now in our political, social political situation, well, that's where people are getting so divisive. And it's like, hey, hating each other, and they can't have a civil conversation. I was listening to Brene Brown recently, whom I'm sure you've all probably heard at some point. She's just so brilliant. But so one of her new book, and she was on with Krista Tippett, and she was saying how she was in this auditorium, a couple thousand people, and talking about, this was building up to the election, and how many people in the audience are of a different political ideology than their family members. All these hands went up, right? And she said, okay, so how many of you are willing to completely lose those relationships? She said there's like a little moment of silence and stillness in the auditorium. And she can feel the kind of the nickel drop, right? It's like, oh, for most of us with our intimate relationships, even though we disagree with somebody, let's say on a political spectrum, we're not willing to sacrifice that relationship. And if we're willing to sacrifice the relationship, then there's an opportunity for us to kind of lean in and investigate, what's that about? And this is what restorative mutuality asks of us. Forgive me, Mom. My mom was like an Olympic level grudge holder. This is how I was raised, right? Don't trust anybody and never forgive, a slight. And so I had an edge to, find the way. How do I trust? How do I trust this other person? People getting close to me or whatever, or asking me questions about myself. So I had to learn to kind of find my way through that, through really being in mutuality, telling the truth. Can we tell the truth to each other? Are we willing to take that risk? And if not, then, well, what's underneath of it? That's the magic of green lighting, right? Once we say yes to the first part, We keep saying yes as it arises, keep saying yes, and then eventually the deeper thing will reveal itself because we've created safety for it. And the same happens with the other, right? We create safety, they can come forward.